She was pressured by her family to marry her sister's millionaire fiancé in Coma shocking twist. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The story begins with a young woman standing in front of a gilded mirror, her hands trembling as she clutched a wedding dress that did not belong to her. The silk was expensive, the veil heavy with jewels, but her reflection was filled not with joy, but with dread. She had never dreamed of a wedding like this. She had never dreamed of marrying her sister's fiancé. And yet, here she was, forced by her own family into the role of a substitute bride. Her sister's fiancé was not just any man. He was a millionaire, the heir to a vast empire, the type of man who made headlines and appeared on magazine covers. But none of that mattered now, because the man she was about to marry lay unconscious in a hospital bed, trapped in a coma after a tragic accident. The wedding was not about love, not about union, but about business, reputation, and money. Do not forget why you are doing this, her mother's cold voice echoed in her mind. If you walk away now, the debts will crush us, and your sister's name will be ruined forever. Her chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to run, to tell them all that this was wrong. But she could not. Her family's survival depended on her obedience. And so she bit her lip until it bled and forced herself into the gown, every step toward the altar feeling like a step into a prison. The ceremony was a cruel charade. Guests whispered behind their hands, their eyes sharp with judgment. That is not the real bride. Someone muttered. Another scoffed. The family must be desperate. Every murmur pierced her heart. But she held her head high, even as tears threatened to spill. When the priest asked her to exchange vows, her hands shook as she slid the wedding ring onto the finger of a man who could not even open his eyes. The coldness of his still hand made her shiver. A diamond sparkled on her own finger, but instead of love, it burned with the weight of duty. The applause was hollow, the kiss was absent. And yet, the papers were signed, and the deal was sealed. She was now Mrs. Ethan Blake, wife of a millionaire who did not know her name. That night, in the grand mansion where she now lived, she stood alone in the bedroom that was not truly hers. The silence was suffocating. Outside, the city glowed with lights, alive with laughter and freedom. But within those walls, she was a prisoner dressed as a bride. As she placed the wedding ring on the nightstand, she whispered to herself, "I am nothing but a placeholder, a shadow wearing another woman's veil." What she did not know was that fate had already shifted. Somewhere in the quiet hum of machines in the hospital room, the man she had just married stirred ever so slightly. His hand twitched. His heart monitor beeped a fraction faster. And though she could not hear it, his soul was already reaching out to hers. The next morning, the reality of her new life struck her with the weight of cold marble floors and silent hallways. She walked through the mansion with her steps echoing, as if to remind her of her isolation. Servants bowed politely, but their eyes betrayed disdain. To them, she was not a bride, but an impostor who had stolen a role she did not deserve. The whispers followed her like shadows, carried in hushed voices behind closed doors. In the grand dining hall, the table stretched endlessly, covered in crystal glasses and silver cutlery polished to perfection, yet only one place was set for her. The emptiness of the seats around her mocked her, reminding her that she was no guest of honor, but a placeholder in a story not written for her. She forced herself to eat in silence, though every bite felt heavy. Later that day, she was summoned to the study. The lawyer of the Blake family sat stiffly behind an oak desk, sliding a thick folder toward her. "This is the marriage contract," he said without warmth. "It ensures that you will not claim any personal assets, and that you will uphold the Blake family's reputation at all costs." Her hands trembled as she opened the file. Page after page was filled with clauses written in cold legal language, words that caged her more tightly than any chain. She glanced up at the lawyer, searching for mercy, but his expression remained stone. "You will live here as Mrs. Ethan Blake," he continued. "You will attend family functions, maintain appearances, and keep your vows. But you are not entitled to decisions regarding his companies or his fortune. Should he recover, the family will decide what comes next." The phrase lingered in the air, "should he recover." Her chest tightened. She wanted to ask, "And if he does not?" But her throat closed around the words. She signed where they told her to sign. Her name on the contract felt like a surrender, each stroke of ink a reminder that her life was no longer her own. When she returned to the mansion that evening, she found herself drawn to the quiet room at the end of the corridor, the room where Ethan lay. Machines hummed steadily, keeping him tethered to life. His face was pale, yet striking, framed by shadows of strength that even sleep could not erase. She hesitated at the doorway, clutching the folder to her chest as if it could shield her. Finally, she stepped closer, placing the signed papers on the nightstand. "This is what they wanted," she whispered, her voice breaking. "A deal sealed with signatures, not love." Her eyes wandered to his hand, resting still against the sheet. On his finger gleamed the wedding ring she had slipped on only the day before. It looked foreign there, like a promise that had not been earned. For reasons she could not explain, she reached out and brushed her fingers against his. His skin was cool, but the simple touch made her heart race. "I do not know you," she admitted softly, "and you do not know me. But for now, we are bound together." The room answered with silence, only the steady rhythm of machines. She pulled away quickly, ashamed of her weakness, and left before anyone could see her. Yet as the door closed, Ethan's eyelids flickered almost imperceptibly. A faint movement, a breath deeper than before. The world outside remained unaware, but something inside him had stirred. And so, while the contract bound her in chains of duty, fate was quietly preparing to break those chains in ways neither of them could yet imagine. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion that glittered with chandeliers and marble floors began to feel less like a palace and more like a cage. She wandered the long corridors, passing portraits of ancestors who stared down at her with cold, painted eyes, as if they too judged her for stepping into a role that was never meant to be hers. Every corner of the Blake estate whispered that she was an outsider. The servants obeyed her presence but never accepted her. Trays were placed a little too hard on the table. Greetings were clipped, formal, and laced with contempt. When she entered a room, conversations died down, and when she left, laughter would follow behind her. She bore it in silence, holding her chin high, though inside her heart ached from the weight of constant rejection. Her mother-in-law, the formidable matriarch of the Blake family, rarely wasted words on her, but when she did, they struck sharper than any blade. One afternoon, as she poured tea for the older woman, the matriarch studied her with cold eyes. "Do not think for a moment that this house will ever be yours," she said. "You are a stand-in, nothing more. Ethan deserves better than a girl who was forced into his life." The words stung, but she bowed her head respectfully, refusing to let tears fall in front of her. Alone later, she sat in her room clutching a small notebook where she scribbled her thoughts at night, her only refuge from the storm of disdain. She wrote not of anger, but of her longing for freedom, and of the strange pull she felt each time she passed the door to Ethan's room. In the quiet hours of the evening, she often slipped inside his chamber. She would sit beside his bed, reading aloud from books she found in the library. Sometimes she read poetry, sometimes novels, her voice soft in the dim light. She told herself she did it because silence was unbearable, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. She spoke to him as if he could hear her, as if her words might reach the depths of his slumber. Once, while watering the flowers in the vase beside him, she noticed the faintest movement of his hand. Startled, she froze, watching, but when nothing followed, she convinced herself it must have been her imagination. Still, she continued caring for the small garden of plants in his room, believing that life and color should remain near him, even if he never opened his eyes again. Her acts of kindness went unseen by the family. To them, she was invisible unless they needed someone to scold. But in those private moments with Ethan, her heart softened. She confessed things she never dared say aloud. "I wonder who you truly are," she whispered one night. "Are you as cold as they are, or different? I do not know why I feel the need to speak to you, but perhaps it is because I am as trapped as you are." She reached out, leaving a small folded note on the nightstand. A simple message: "Do not give up. There is someone here who believes you will come back." She never expected him to see it. She left it as if writing to herself, a reminder that hope, however fragile, was still alive. And somewhere, deep within his unconscious state, the words reached him. His dreams shifted. A voice echoed in the darkness, steady and warm. Fingers that had lain still for months curled slightly, clutching the sheet as though trying to hold on to the sound. Outside, the world continued to treat her as an intruder. But inside that room, without realizing it, she was planting seeds of connection, seeds that would one day grow into something stronger than duty, something neither contracts nor prejudice could erase. Nights in the Blake mansion grew colder, but within the walls of Ethan's room, there was a strange warmth that neither of them could explain. She continued her quiet visits, sometimes sitting for hours, speaking into the silence. Her words were not rehearsed speeches, just fragments of her heart stories from her childhood, memories of simpler days, her fears, and the loneliness of being treated as invisible in a house that glittered with wealth. She never knew that each word slipped through the veil of unconsciousness and stirred Ethan's mind. In the depths of his coma, where shadows blurred reality, her voice became a lifeline. He did not know her name, nor her face, but her tone was etched into his soul, like sunlight breaking through endless night. One evening, after reading aloud from a worn poetry book, she sighed and placed the book on the nightstand. She pulled out her notebook and scribbled a small message before tucking it beneath the vase of flowers. "You are not alone. I believe you can hear me." She hesitated, then added, "If you wake up, I hope you will remember this voice." As she reached for his hand to adjust the blanket, something happened. His fingers twitched faintly, brushing against hers. She gasped and froze, her eyes widening. She leaned closer, whispering, "Ethan, can you hear me?" But the silence returned, steady and unbroken, the machines humming their endless rhythm. Convinced it was a trick of her imagination, she sat back, though her heart raced wildly. She scolded herself for wishing too hard. Yet part of her could not let go of the hope that somewhere inside he had responded. What she never saw was the dream unfolding within his mind. In the darkness, he reached for a hand, warm and steady, pulling him back from the edge of despair. He could not see her face, but he felt her presence, heard her voice reading lines of poetry, felt her touch like an anchor keeping him from drifting away completely. Her small gestures became rituals. She replaced the flowers every week, read new chapters each night, and left notes of encouragement tucked into his books or beneath the lamp. To her, it was an act of kindness for someone who might never return. To him, locked in silence, it was salvation. Unbeknownst to her, the nurses who came to check on him noticed subtle changes, slightly stronger reflexes, longer breaths, tiny signs that his body was responding. They dismissed it as natural fluctuations, but Ethan's subconscious knew better. He was fighting, guided by her voice, her touch, her presence. One night, as a storm raged outside, thunder echoing against the mansion's walls, she stayed longer than usual. Sitting beside him, she whispered, "If you can hear me, then know this. You are not alone. They may all believe I am just a stand-in, but I see you as more than a name or a contract, and even if you never wake, I will not let you be forgotten." As her words lingered in the air, Ethan's hand, weak but deliberate, closed ever so slightly around the edge of the blanket. It was a movement so small, so fleeting, that she missed it when she turned to blow out the candle. But in his dream, he held her hand tightly, unwilling to let go. And so, in the stillness of that room, intimacy was being woven thread by thread, an unseen bond growing stronger each day, quietly defying the walls of duty and the coldness of the world outside. Neither of them yet understood it, but what was forming between them was no longer just chance, it was destiny. The turning point arrived on a morning that seemed ordinary at first. The mansion was quiet, the corridors filled only with the sound of footsteps echoing against polished marble. She carried a book in her hands as she made her way toward Ethan's room, ready to continue her nightly routine of reading aloud even in the daylight. When she entered, the air felt different. The steady hum of the machines seemed sharper, the rhythm of the monitor more pronounced. She placed the book on the nightstand and leaned closer to him, as she always did, speaking softly. "I have brought you another story. Perhaps you will like this one better than the last. It is about a man who lost everything, only to find something worth far more than riches. Her voice faltered when she noticed the subtle movement of his eyelids. At first, she thought her tired eyes were playing tricks on her. But then it happened again, a faint flutter, followed by the twitch of his fingers beneath the blanket. Her breath caught in her throat. "Ethan?" she whispered, her hand reaching for his. The sound of his name, spoken with such tenderness, seemed to stir something deep inside him. Slowly, his eyes opened, unfocused at first, then blinking against the light. The moment stretched, fragile and unbelievable. She gasped, tears filling her eyes. "You are awake!" He tried to speak, but his voice came out hoarse, a whisper that barely reached her ears. "Who are you?" The question pierced her. For months she had poured her heart into words he might never hear, and now that he was awake, he did not know her. She forced a trembling smile, holding his hand gently. "My name does not matter right now. What matters is that you are back. You are safe." Doctors rushed in, their voices overlapping, machines beeping urgently as they examined him. She stepped aside, her heart pounding. The family soon followed, their footsteps hurried, their faces painted with shock and calculation. The matriarch's eyes gleamed as she cried out, "My son, you are awake!" But beneath the joy was a flicker of fear, the fear that he might remember things that would unravel their control. Through the blur of activity, Ethan's gaze sought her again. There was confusion in his eyes, but also recognition, not of her face, but of her voice. I know that sound," he murmured. You were there." Her hands clenched together at her chest, emotions swirling. She had no time to answer before the family swept around him, pulling focus back to themselves. She retreated quietly, unnoticed, her heart torn between relief and dread. Later that evening, when the noise had faded and he was resting once more, Ethan found himself haunted by the echo of her words. In his dreams, her voice returned, reading softly, urging him to hold on. The sensation of her hand lingered, more vivid than the faces of those who claimed to love him. For her part, she sat alone in her room, clutching the notebook where she had written all her secret thoughts. She whispered into the empty air, "He is awake now. Everything will change. But will he remember that it was me?" What neither of them knew was that this awakening marked the beginning of a silent test. Ethan had returned to the world of the living, but uncertainty filled his heart. He was determined to uncover the truth about his family, about the girl who stayed by his side, and about the mysterious bond that had saved him from the darkness. And she, still bound by the chains of duty and secrecy, did not realize that her quiet kindness had already planted itself deep within him, waiting for the right moment to bloom. The news of Ethan's awakening spread like wildfire through the Blake estate, and with it came a storm of shifting loyalties and hidden agendas. The mansion, once quiet with only the hum of machines and whispered contempt, now buzzed with activity. Family members who had ignored her presence suddenly returned, their faces painted with false concern, their eyes glinting with greed. For her, the change was suffocating. The little moments of peace she once had in Ethan's room were gone. Now, she was pushed to the background, treated once again as a placeholder, a name on paper rather than a person. At the dining table, the whispers grew louder. "She will not last long now that Ethan is awake," someone murmured. Another added, "It is only a matter of time before she is cast aside." Her sister returned soon after, sweeping into the estate with dramatic tears and trembling hands. She clung to Ethan's arm as though nothing had changed, speaking sweetly of their past, painting herself as the woman who truly belonged at his side. The family embraced her, welcoming her back as though the months of absence had never happened. Ethan, however, watched it all in silence. His body was still weak, his movements careful, but his mind was sharper than they realized. He remembered the darkness of his coma, the voice that had reached him, the presence that had kept him tethered. It was not the sister who had vanished when tragedy struck. It was someone else. And though he had not yet spoken the truth aloud, his gaze often drifted toward the quiet figure who stood on the edges of the room, the one who never tried to claim credit for his awakening. One evening, when the family gathered to discuss the future of his businesses, she entered the room carrying a tray of tea. Her sister sneered, whispering just loud enough for Ethan to hear, "Imagine, a girl like her pretending to be Mrs. Blake. What a disgrace." Laughter followed, cruel and cutting, but she ignored it, setting the tray down with steady hands. Ethan's eyes lingered on her as she bowed slightly and left without a word. He noticed the strength in her silence, the dignity she carried despite the humiliation. It struck him harder than the shallow sweetness his family showered upon him. Later, when the house grew quiet, he asked his nurse a question that startled her. "Who stayed by my side while I was unconscious?" The nurse hesitated, then admitted, "It was her. Every night, reading, talking, writing notes. She never left you." His chest tightened at the confirmation of what he already suspected. He remembered the warmth of her voice, the touch that reached him in the darkness. And yet, he did not reveal what he knew, not yet. Instead, he decided to wait, to watch, to see how she acted when she believed he had no memory. For her, the days became heavier. The family's cruelty sharpened now that her role seemed unnecessary. Her sister flaunted her return, whispering poison into the matriarch's ear, painting her as an opportunist who had trapped them all in shame. At night, she wept silently into her pillow, clutching the notebook where she had recorded her heart. But in the mornings, she rose with quiet strength, carrying on with her duties, never letting them see her break. The tension in the mansion grew unbearable. Whispers turned into confrontations, and one evening, during a family dinner, her sister pointed across the table and said with venom, "She has no right to be here. Ethan, you must end this farce. She is nothing more than a mistake." The room fell silent, all eyes on Ethan. She lowered her gaze, expecting him to agree, bracing herself for the words that would end her fragile place in this world. But Ethan said nothing. He simply lifted his glass, his eyes unreadable, and drank in silence. The family interpreted it as indifference, but beneath that calm exterior, a storm was brewing. He was not ready to reveal the truth, but he knew this much. The woman they dismissed as nothing was the very one who had saved him. And so the tension rose, the lines between loyalty and betrayal blurring with each passing day. The family plotted, her sister schemed, and Ethan silently observed, waiting for the moment when the truth could no longer be ignored. The breaking point arrived during a gathering that was meant to celebrate Ethan's recovery. The mansion was filled with relatives, business partners, and socialites eager to witness the return of the heir. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, champagne glasses clinked, and polite laughter rippled through the air. Yet, beneath the polished surface, tension coiled like a snake ready to strike. She stood in the corner of the grand hall, dressed modestly, her presence overshadowed by her sister's dazzling gown and carefully rehearsed smiles. Guests whispered as they glanced at her. "That is the stand-in bride," someone said. "She was only here because of the coma." The words stabbed her heart, but she swallowed the pain in silence, determined not to make a scene. As the evening wore on, her sister seized the moment to tighten her grip. She slipped her arm through Ethan's, her voice loud enough for all to hear. "Ethan, do you remember how much we loved each other? I was always the one meant for you. This arrangement was only temporary, a duty forced upon my sister. Tell them, Ethan. Tell them she has no place here." The room fell silent, every gaze fixed on Ethan. She lowered her head, her hands clasped tightly together. This was it, the moment she would be cast aside, discarded like a pawn no longer useful. Ethan rose slowly from his chair, his movements deliberate, his eyes sweeping the crowd before settling on her. "You want the truth?" he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Then hear it clearly. The person who stood by me when I was lost, the voice that kept me alive, the hand that pulled me back from darkness, it was not you." Gasps echoed through the hall. His sister froze, her painted smile cracking. The matriarch's eyes widened in disbelief. Murmurs erupted among the guests. Ethan stepped closer to the quiet woman standing at the edge of the crowd. "It was her," he declared. "She read to me when no one else bothered. She cared for me when the rest of you were too busy protecting reputations and wealth. In the silence of my coma, it was her voice I heard, and it is her face I woke to remember." Tears blurred her vision as the weight of his words sank in. She had never expected recognition, never dreamed that her hidden acts of kindness would be revealed so openly. The hall buzzed with shock, but Ethan's gaze never wavered from hers. Her sister lashed out, her voice shrill. "You are lying. She is nothing. She was forced into this marriage. She only stayed because she had no choice. Ethan's reply was steady, his eyes cold as they met his sister's. No one forced her to sit by my bed for endless nights. No one forced her to speak life into me when I was nearly gone. That was her choice. That was her heart. Something you could never understand. The atmosphere shifted, the whispers now laced with curiosity and respect. The image of the forgotten stand-in bride began to transform in the eyes of those who had dismissed her. For the first time since the wedding, she felt seen, not as a shadow, not as a placeholder, but as a woman whose quiet strength had changed the course of a life. Her hands trembled as she met Ethan's gaze, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Ethan reached out, his hands steady despite the storm around them. "You are not a mistake," he said firmly. "You are my truth." And in that moment, before the watching eyes of the world, the walls of deception began to crumble, and the reality of their bond stood unshakable. What had once been a hidden connection was now revealed, and nothing, no contract, no whispers, no schemes could erase it. The revelation in the grand hall did not simply end with shock. It ignited a battle that had been building beneath the surface for months. The Blake family, so used to control, could not allow Ethan's declaration to go unchallenged. His sister's face twisted with rage, her carefully constructed facade crumbling in front of the very guests she had hoped to impress. "How dare you humiliate me like this?" she screamed, her voice shrill enough to silence the crowd. "You have been deceived, Ethan. She is nothing more than a schemer who tricked her way into this family. I am the one who truly belongs here." Ethan turned to face her fully, his eyes cold. "You abandoned me when I needed you most. When I lay between life and death, you chose silence, absence, and convenience. Do not speak of belonging, because you forfeited that right the moment you walked away." The guests murmured in agreement, shifting uneasily at the raw truth now exposed. The matriarch attempted to restore order, stepping forward with her usual authority. "Ethan, you are confused. This girl was forced into this arrangement. She is beneath us. You must not let misplaced gratitude cloud your judgment. Our family's reputation is at stake." Ethan's voice rang out, firm and unyielding. "Reputation? Is that what you call it? Forcing an innocent girl into a marriage she never wanted, treating her like dirt while she carried the burden you placed upon her shoulders? That is not reputation. That is cruelty disguised as dignity." All eyes turned to her then, the young woman who had been silent through every insult, every sneer. She stood trembling, but her gaze was steady, her voice clear as she finally spoke. "I never wanted your wealth. I never wanted your name. All I wanted was to protect my family from ruin. And even then, I never expected kindness. But what I did with sincerity. Not because of who he was, but because of what I believed was right." The hall was silent, her words hanging in the air like a verdict. For the first time, people saw her not as a stand-in, but as a woman of integrity who had borne the weight of injustice with dignity. Ethan stepped closer, standing firmly at her side. "And that is why she will remain here, not as a contract, not as a shadow, but as my wife." His hand reached for hers, intertwining their fingers before the watchful eyes of the entire room. His sister's fury boiled over. "You will regret this, Ethan. She will destroy everything." She lunged as if to rip her away from him, but security intervened swiftly, pulling her back. The sight of her thrashing against their grip only revealed the depth of her desperation and spite. Ethan addressed the guests once more, his voice carrying authority that silenced even his fiercest critics. "Let it be known from this day forward that I will no longer tolerate lies and manipulation in this house. Anyone who dares disrespect my wife disrespects me, and I will defend her with everything I have." The statement rang like a gavel striking in a court of justice. Heads bowed, whispers shifted to murmurs of reluctant admiration, and the tide began to turn. The Blake matriarch's lips pressed into a thin line, her silence louder than any protest. She had lost control, and she knew it. For her, the moment was overwhelming. She had braced herself for humiliation, for dismissal, but instead, she found herself shielded by the very man who had once been a stranger in a hospital bed. Tears welled in her eyes, not from weakness but from the release of a burden she had carried alone for far too long. Ethan squeezed her hand gently, his voice lowering so only she could hear. "No more shadows, no more silence. From now on, you walk beside me, not behind me. In that instant, the chains of oppression that had bound her began to shatter. Justice had been spoken aloud, not in courts or contracts, but in truth laid bare for all to see. And with Ethan at her side, the world that once mocked her now had no choice but to recognize her worth. The celebration had begun as a stage for appearances, but it ended as a reckoning. And in the ashes of deception, a new foundation of justice and dignity was built, one that would change the course of both their lives forever. The days following the confrontation in the Grand Hall brought a new calm to the Blake estate. The constant whispers and suspicious glances that had haunted her steps began to fade, replaced with a quiet respect that was unfamiliar but deeply relieving. For the first time since the wedding, she no longer felt like a shadow moving through gilded halls. She felt like someone who belonged. Ethan, though still recovering physically, grew stronger with each passing day. What had once been strained steps now carried him with confidence. His voice, once hoarse, regained the depth and steadiness of a man who knew exactly what he wanted. And every choice he made from then on proved one truth: he would not let her stand alone again. One afternoon, as autumn leaves swirled across the estate's gardens, he asked her to walk with him. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of change, and she followed quietly as he led her to a secluded spot near a fountain. She remembered standing in this very garden before, when she had felt like a prisoner, bound by a contract that robbed her of freedom. Now, the same place felt entirely different. Ethan turned to her, his eyes reflecting the sincerity she had once doubted she would ever see from him. In his hand, he held a small velvet box. The first ring was nothing more than a symbol of duty, placed on your finger without choice, he said softly. But today, I want to give you this one, not as a contract, but as a promise. Her breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a simple yet elegant band. The diamond was not the largest she had ever seen, but it gleamed with a purity that mirrored the moment. Tears filled her eyes as he continued, his voice steady. You stood by me when I was at my weakest. You gave me strength when I had none. And you reminded me that love is not measured by wealth or status, but by the courage to stand together. So I ask you, not as an heir or as a Blake, but simply as a man, will you choose me this time, freely? Her heart trembled with the weight of his words. The memory of the cold, lifeless ring placed on her finger during that forced wedding flashed through her mind. Now, here he was, offering her the chance to replace it with something real. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "Yes, I choose you." Ethan slid the new ring onto her finger, his hand warm and steady. Unlike the icy heaviness of the first, this ring fit like it had been waiting for her all along. He pulled her into his embrace, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that happiness was not just a fleeting dream. As they stood together, the fountain's gentle trickle echoing in the background, she realized how far they had come. From a marriage built on lies and coercion, to a love that had blossomed in silence and sacrifice, their journey had defied every expectation. The Blake family, once filled with disdain, could no longer deny the truth. What had begun as a story of shame and substitution had transformed into something undeniable, the triumph of sincerity over greed, of love over appearances. That evening, Ethan raised a toast at a small dinner, his eyes locked on hers as he declared before the family, "This woman is my partner, my equal, and my choice. From this day forward, we face the world together." And with those words, the final chains of doubt shattered. She smiled through her tears, knowing that the path ahead would not always be easy, but it would be theirs to walk together. The girl who once whispered to a man lost in darkness was now the woman standing proudly at his side, loved and cherished in the light. What began as a marriage of shadows had become the love story of a lifetime.